Hi, I'm Tom, and in this video I'll give you some tips and tricks on how to choose a paint scheme for your army so you can overcome your painting fears. I'll guide you through how I decided to paint the Kruleboyz from the Warhammer Age of Sigmar Dominion box and show you how I approach any project. If this guide helps you at all, then please comment, like and
subscribe.
Let me know what you think of my scheme and tell me how you approach your painting project. Maybe even consider supporting me on Patreon. Stay tuned to the end, as you could also own this army. All you need to start a project is your mind. I start any painting project by reading the lore on the units I'm painting, or as I did with the Dominion box, I read the mini booklet and reference cards for the unit. The Games Workshop team put a lot of time and effort into making this material to help set the story and vision for these models. I use these unit descriptions and artwork to guide my imagination. It might shock you to hear that I do not normally decide on a paint scheme until well after I've built the models and started picking up paint. While looking at the material and building the models, I imagine them as real life individual characters in a story which I am witnessing or physically part of. I look at their facial expressions and body poses, and even their equipped gear. Don't be scared or embarrassed to imagine yourself in their world. Imagine being one of them and fighting alongside them, or even against them. Imagine what motivates you to fight your enemy. Consider how they would behave, how would they move, how would they act, even how they would smell. Imagine their moods. Are they happy, angry, silly? What words come to mind? All of these thoughts and questions will guide your imagination and eventually your paint scheme. I make notes on keywords that come to the front of my mind when I'm doing this. This is all controlled by your mind, and your paint scheme can help tell the story you have created. Remember, you don't need to follow the official paint schemes, but it's still okay to like them too. Pinterest and Instagram are great places for inspiration on colour schemes too, and are free to use. I think the most important thing to remember is to try and relax. Don't put pressure on yourself, it's a hobby. If you aren't having fun, come back to it later. Bippity boppity boop. After creating my story, I decided to paint the coolest model. The Killaboss on Greater Gnashtoof. Giant hyena-like beast. Maybe it cackles like a hyena. 1, 2, 3. Kablamo! Primed it black. Dirty paint thumb, hide it. I then put on pale flesh on the Gnashtoof. My vision for these orks is that they are from a poisonous, dangerous swamp. They wear the flayed skin of their enemies and display their heads as trophies, and are well adapted to guerrilla tactics. I imagined green flesh would make them look very obvious and easy to spot. That, and I don't like green orks. In my story, these orruks have adapted to have grey, pink flesh, like orruk from Lord of the Rings. This will help sell the gruesome and evil scheme I'm going for. I did a white zenithal over the flesh colour to highlight the model. Then I started on the orc flesh. I used Dawnstone, as I decided they would be grey from above, with the pale flesh underneath. I also decided here that the more cunning and older the orc, the greyer the flesh, so this Killaboss would be very grey. I then used Volupus Pink, as I decided the Gnashtoof would be bright from above, matching the colourful plants of the swamps. I targeted the upper half of the skin, leaving the underneath pale flesh. I then used skull and flesh all over the skin for the Gnashtoof, ensuring I wicked away any pools that collected. I wasn't worried about any tide marks here, so weathering would cover that. Basilicanum Grey was then used on the Killaboss flesh and rubble. As I said, the darker the orruk skin, the older and more ruthless they are. I then decided to paint the scare shield blue, but this didn't seem right to me. Why is it blue? Why do they have these shields? The lore says that they used to scare their enemies and trick them into thinking there were big beasts with them, like a Gnashtoof, so why not paint the shields to look like the Gnashtoof? Excellent idea, Tom. I do actually fix this later. This is why I paint a test model. My imagination is still inspiring the story I'm trying to tell. Doing a test model helps as you can visualize your ideas, then be confident when painting the remainder of your army or unit. I gave the base a simple Plaguebearer flesh colour to see what it looked like. The swamps are slimy and smelly and full of life. The rotting heads and the spikes got a bit of green to suggest they are decomposing. This would rot from the cut up towards the rest of the head. They love their trophies and are all about causing fear and distress, so they are likely wearing leather and skin and flesh of their enemies. I used a mixture of brown contrast paints to mimic this. Grunter fur and snakebite leather are amazing for leather if you water them down slightly. They go on a lot smoother. Wildwood just use some of the wooden parts and the cables or ropes. Skeleton Horde was used for some of the wooden parts, skulls, teeth and claws. Here I tidied up any parts that had been oversprayed with pale flesh. At this stage I knew I was happy with the look, I just had metallics and weathering to do, so I got to work on the other models. 1, 2, 3, kablamma! Bibbidi bubbidi boop. I followed the same steps as with the Killaboss. I did the Hobgrots differently to the other models. I decided to make them all pale flesh coloured, with no grey skin at all. This is where I had a great idea. These orruks have tamed the Gnashtoof, so they must respect their power. The scare shields are supposed to put fear into the enemy, so they would make the scare shields look like Gnashtoofs. They even paint the blue tongue of the Gnashtoof on their faces to make themselves look like them. So I painted all the scare shields in Volupus pink, which matched the colour of the Gnashtoof. I used Temple Guard blue to paint the tongues and war paint markings on their chins. This giant tongue was from an enemy they hunted down to obtain its blue tongue, to make their banner as scary and fear-inducing as possible. This is where I decided on the name of the clan, the Blue Tongue. Avalon Sunset was used on the eyes. Whoa, almost dropped that. Trying to escape. The orruk eyes and Scare Shield eyes were all painted yellow. I wasn't too worried about going over the edges because this would have an oil wash in the crevices. I then painted all the metallics and gave them a quick spray of matte varnish. Then onto weathering. Streaking grime was put all over the models. Bibbidi bobbidi boop. Streaking grime, if you don't know what it is like an oil paint. It's oily and can be wiped off. I used some white spirits. I wore a glove and I used some cotton buds to dab the white spirits into the models. And being gentle when doing this, just dabbing away the grime and leaving some in the recesses. Dab dab. This will dry matte once all the spirit has evaporated. You see here, it just leaves a dirty dark covering over all the model, making it look weathered and used. I then went on to an oil wash. This is literally just black oil paint mixed with some white spirit. I want these creatures to look grim, dark and grimy, so the black oil wash helps highlight all the recesses and makes the models pop. When the spirit in the wash has evaporated, I clean them up with some cotton buds, wiping away the black from the raised surfaces. This works especially well on the leather, as it leaves it looking worn and old. The reason I had the varnish layer before the grime, if you're too rigorous at this stage, it will rip off the paint. I then did some light weathering of rust and verdigris. The swamp would be humid and wet, so the orcs' weapons would rust. I used the light rust deposits from AK Interactive. Just dab the crusted rust onto the metals and clean up with a brush with white spirits on. Then onto the rust streaks. I wash this all over the metal and again clean with a brush with white spirits. Don't worry about going over the edges onto the skin, it just adds to the grim look. I then added a verdigris. I've had people educate me in the comments that this only appears on brass, etc. I'd like to say, yeah, I know that, but it looks cool. Also, if we're picking foals, I'd start off with orcs don't exist. I also clean the verdigris up with a damp brush with white spirit, and if it's too bright after application, you can just go over it with a bit of black oil wash. With the basing, I used this AK Interactive Dark Earth diorama paint. Basically a paint that's supposed to look like mud. I painted this onto the bases and ensured I painted it on their feet too. They would be squelching in the mud en route to ambush their enemy. I also applied it to the end of their spears. I imagine they use these to balance themselves in deep water and mud, so their ends would be muddy too. With the Gnashtoof, it would have muddy paws too. I then dry brushed the mud with moot green to mimic chickweed or bright swamp moss on the bases. Showing this as a swampy green smelly habitat matches their paint scheme really well. I then went on to the glow effects. These jars are going to be highlighted white, and then I decided on a pink glow. I had an idea that this pink would be from a fluorescent poisonous plant that they use to poison water supplies and food with, and the Shaman was brewing up some fresh poison. Start off by blocking in the white areas, then overspraying them with the white, purposely spreading the light onto nearby areas like the hand and hood. The grot would have it glowing onto them from underneath. I ended up almost ruining my entire paint job on these two by applying the pink. When adding the glow effects, less is more. The Shaman cape looks ridiculous with how much pink it has, but the key is not to panic. I decided to knock it back a bit with some Carabig Crimson to see if it would look less crazy with a darker purple on it. This did help a lot, but it was still missing something. I decided to paint the fire underneath the pot by spraying it white and then with a yellow ink to mimic a glow from underneath. While doing this, I missed and hit the pink on the grot's side and it looked awesome. So my new plan was a yellow to pink glow. So I re-highlighted the middle of the flasks and the brewing pot. This yellow ink is amazing. I think I've used it in every video. Really saved the day with this. So the yellow I'm purposely spraying in a circle around the source of the light. Here's what it looked like. It's like a yellow to orange to pink glow. So lesson learned, if you mess something up, you can always try and fix it. I then finished the bases with Gamer's Grass Tufts. The small moss ones are amazing. I glued them down with a little bit of PVA, going for a poisonous, ominous swamp here, so colourful tufts are great. I then used this Vallejo water texture acrylic and some wash to make some swamp water. 1, 2, have it! Adding this water texture really added to the swamp feel. It soaked into the moss tufts and made them look like submerged plants. And that was it, the models are done. I'm really happy with how they came out. They're grimdark and ominous and really tell the story I made in my head. What do you think of them? Let me know in the comments. Tell me, how do you come up with a paint scheme? If you'd like to own this army, I'll be putting it up for auction on eBay as soon as the video launches at a 99p start. The money from this will be put straight back into the channel to help it grow. Links are in the description below. Please subscribe, like, comment, and consider my Patreon if you want to support me further. And I'd like to say thank you to my first Patreon supporters. You are the beginning of me making my dream a reality, of doing this full time. Hail to you, champions. My first patrons are Christopher Robinson and Lee Orban. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching.